You remember the exact moment, not a financial milestone, not a number crossing a threshold on a statement you checked on a Tuesday morning, a feeling, a specific, physical, unmistakable shift in how your life felt from the inside that arrived not when you expected it and not with any announcement, but quietly, in the middle of an ordinary week, when something that used to feel like a threat started feeling like an inconvenience instead. Maybe it was the first time a car repair didn't derail your month. Maybe it was the first time you said yes to something without doing the mental math first. Maybe it was a Sunday night that felt different from every Sunday night before it, not because anything had changed in your life externally, but because something had changed in the financial ground beneath it. That shift wasn't random. It happened at a specific net worth level, and there are two more levels above it where the same thing happens again, where the texture of daily life changes in ways that have almost nothing to do with what you're buying and everything to do with what you're no longer afraid of. Today, we're going through all three, not the financial mechanics, the actual feeling, what changes, when it changes, and why understanding these three levels is more useful than any savings rate calculator you'll ever run. My name is William, and if you've ever wondered whether the number you're building toward will actually feel different when you get there, the answer is yes, but probably not in the way you're expecting. Level 1. Somewhere between $10,000 and $50,000, the Sunday night shift. You know what Sunday nights used to feel like, the low-level hum that started around 7 p.m. and built quietly through the evening. Not panic, not crisis, just the persistent background awareness that the week ahead required money you weren't entirely sure you had in the right configuration. The dentist appointment you'd been putting off, the car that needed something you didn't want to price out, the credit card balance that had been almost paid off for 4 months. That feeling has a name in behavioral economics. It's called financial scarcity mindset, and the Princeton research that documented it found it consumes approximately 13 IQ points of cognitive bandwidth while you're living inside it. You're not just stressed about money, you're making every other decision in your life with a brain that's already partially occupied by the financial calculation running in the background. The first level where life starts feeling genuinely different is somewhere between $10,000 and $50,000 in net worth, specifically when your liquid emergency fund covers 3 to 6 months of essential expenses. The number isn't as important as what it represents. The first time a bad thing can happen without the bad thing becoming a financial emergency simultaneously. Your transmission fails, your landlord raises the rent, you get a medical bill you weren't expecting, and instead of the cascade, the mental spiral, the credit card, the robbing Peter to pay Paul arithmetic that characterized every previous version of this situation, you just handle it from the account and move on. That handling it without cascading is the shift. It doesn't feel like wealth, it feels like breathing room, like the background calculation that was always running has been given enough data to stop running constantly and only check in occasionally. You sleep differently, not dramatically differently, you just stop waking up at 3 a.m. to check a number that hasn't moved since 11 p.m. That is what $10,000 to $50,000 actually buys, not freedom, the first approximation of it. Level 2. Somewhere between $100,000 and $250,000, the job changes. You still work. Nothing about your professional life looks different from the outside. Same desk, same meetings, same manager, same commute. But something has shifted in how all of it feels from the inside, and the shift is specific enough to name. The job used to be non-negotiable, not because you loved it or hated it, but because the mortgage required it, the car payment required it. The life you'd built required the income it produced on a schedule that didn't accommodate disruption. The employer had leverage over you that had nothing to do with the job itself. It came from the financial structure underneath the job, which required the paycheck to remain intact regardless of what happened at the desk. At somewhere between $100,000 and $250,000 in net worth, particularly when a meaningful portion of that is liquid and invested rather than locked in home equity, that leverage shifts, not disappears, shifts. You walk into a difficult conversation with a manager and your posture is different. You have 8 months of runway. You could say the thing you've been not saying for 2 years, and the worst-case outcome is a job search from a position of stability rather than desperation.
You probably don't say it, but the option changes how the room feels. It changes what you're willing to ask for, what you're willing to accept, what you're willing to walk away from. Charlie Munger called the first $100,000 a threshold, the point where the financial math mechanically changes because returns start approaching contributions. He was right about the math. What he didn't say, because he was talking about math, is that something changes in the psychology at this level too. The money starts feeling like it's working with you rather than against you, like you have a teammate that shows up every day regardless of what happens at the office. At $100,000 to $250,000, the job is still necessary, but it starts being a choice in a way it wasn't before. And choices, even theoretical ones you never exercise, change how life feels from the inside in ways that are difficult to describe and impossible to unfeel once you felt them.
Level 3. Somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million. The math becomes louder than the fear. Something specific happens to your relationship with money at this level that has no equivalent at the levels below it. The daily market fluctuation on a $700,000 portfolio is $7,000 to $21,000 on a normal day. Numbers that used to represent months of savings now represent hours of market movement. And the first time you see a $15,000 down day and feel not panic, not the stomach drop, not the compulsion to sell, mild curiosity about what caused it, and confidence that it doesn't matter, you understand something about money that no amount of financial content can teach you before you've lived it. The fear doesn't disappear, but the math gets louder than the fear. At $700,000, invested at 7% average annual returns, your portfolio generates $49,000 this year without a single additional contribution. That is more than the median American individual earns in a full year at a full-time job. Your money has a better job than most people. And once you've watched it work for long enough, through a correction, through a recovery, through the cycle that the people who panic sell miss every time, the trust in the mechanism replaces the fear of the balance. This is the level where the 3 a.m. banking app check becomes a memory rather than a habit. Not because the number is so large that nothing can touch it. $700,000 can absolutely be touched by a severe enough sequence of events, but because the relationship with the number has changed. You've watched it fall and recover. You've learned that your job is not to protect it from volatility, but to let it work through volatility. That lesson, absorbed through experience rather than content, changes how money feels permanently. At this level, something else shifts that nobody talks about enough. The decisions you make about work, about time, about relationships, about risk start being made from genuine preference rather than financial necessity. Not all of them. The mortgage still exists, the obligations haven't disappeared, but the proportion of decisions made from fear versus from choice has inverted in a way that reorganizes the texture of daily life more fundamentally than any purchase you could make with the balance. You start measuring time differently, not in dollars per hour, but in whether the hours feel like yours.
3 levels. 3 shifts, none of them feel like what the financial content industry told you they would feel like. Not arrival, not triumph, not the dramatic before and after transformation that gets posted about. They feel quieter than that, more physical, more like a loosening than a winning. The breathing room at $10,000 to $50,000. The leverage shift at $100,000 to $250,000. The math drowning out the fear at $500,000 to $1 million. You're either inside one of these levels right now, approaching one, or looking back at one wondering when exactly the shift happened. It probably happened on an ordinary Tuesday without announcing itself. That's how these things go. The number changes first, the feeling follows, and once the feeling arrives, once the breathing room is real, and the leverage has shifted, and the math is louder than the fear, you understand why the people who got there kept going, even when the early years gave them almost nothing to show for it. The early years weren't building the balance, they were building the feeling that makes everything else possible. 3 levels,
3 shifts that have nothing to do with what you're buying and everything to do with what you stop being afraid of. Subscribe for a new video every week and drop in the comments which level you're currently at. The conversation down there is always worth reading.